The Sound of Music didn't just make money in 1965, it made Hollywood temporarily insane. Studio executives across Los Angeles genuinely convinced themselves they had cracked the code on big-budget musicals permanently, and what followed was one of the most spectacular collective financial collapses in the industry's history. Roughly $150 million in losses, spread across just 3 years, came from films that in many cases drew real audiences. The people showed up. The budgets just consumed them whole. 9 films, 9 box office disasters, and almost none of them failed the way you'd expect. This era sits right at the hinge point between old Hollywood and the new Hollywood movement, the moment when Easy Rider and Bonnie and Clyde were proving that lean, unconventional filmmaking could generate enormous returns, while the major studios were still writing 9-figure checks for roadshow musicals nobody had asked for. And it's worth noting that Hollywood had already seen this movie once before. Cleopatra in 1963 had nearly destroyed 20th Century Fox on its own, and the lessons from that disaster had apparently not been filed anywhere useful. Richard Zanuck, head of 20th Century Fox, compared his own studio's output to the Ford Edsel, and he was talking about a film he personally greenlit. Star, the 1968 biographical musical directed by Robert Wise and starring Julie Andrews, cost Fox $14 million to produce, a figure that excluded marketing costs entirely, and it pulled back roughly $4 million in worldwide nominal theatrical gross. That's not a disappointing return on investment. That's a financial crater. The logic had seemed airtight. Robert Wise directed The Sound of Music. Julie Andrews starred in it. The formula was letter perfect, and the result was the exact opposite of what anyone at the studio anticipated. Audiences in 1968 had no appetite for a period showbiz biography about a British stage star named Gertrude Lawrence, a figure most of them had never encountered, and the film arrived in cinemas in October of that year and died with quiet efficiency. But here's the thing. Fox refused to accept the verdict. They re-released Star in 1969 under the title Those Were the Happy Times, trimmed roughly 40 minutes from the runtime, and sent the same film back into theaters with a new identity. It failed again, finding no audience it hadn't already failed to find the first time around. That level of commitment to a losing position is almost admirable, in a way that has nothing to do with financial wisdom. Star represents the defining case of a studio betting enormous sums not on a story, but on a formula, and discovering that formulas expire whether you acknowledge it or not. Dr. Dolittle is where The Sound of Music hangover first revealed its full severity. The 1967 Fox musical, directed by Richard Fleischer and starring Rex Harrison, carried a production budget of $17 million in nominal terms before marketing costs, and it grossed approximately $9 million worldwide, producing a net loss of roughly $10.8 million in nominal 1967 dollars. One inflation estimate places the equivalent figure at around $102 million today, though the precise methodology behind that calculation remains unspecified. 9 Academy Award nominations followed, including 2 wins, one for Best Visual Effects. You would think that level of awards recognition would indicate something had gone right creatively, and the answer is that what went right was the campaign itself, which reportedly involved considerable generosity toward Academy voters in ways that attracted close attention at the time. The film, commercially, was a write-off regardless. What Fox absorbed from Dr. Dolittle was not a lesson about fiscal restraint. The studio's takeaway somehow was to spend more and move faster, which produced Star in 1968 and Hello, Dolly in 1969, building toward a run of decisions that would threaten the studio's survival. Dr. Dolittle established the template: enormous budget, respectable award nominations, critical indifference, and audiences arriving in numbers the cost structure could not sustain. There's something genuinely melancholy about Hello, Dolly because it isn't a bad film. Gene Kelly directed it with craft and confidence, Barbra Streisand delivered a performance of real scale, and the production collected 3 Academy Awards for art direction, musical score, and sound, earning a Best Picture nomination alongside them. Fox still lost money because a production cost of approximately $25 million in nominal 1969 dollars returned domestic theatrical rental of roughly $15.02 million, and no amount of critical goodwill closes that gap. Broadway producer David Merrick, whose theatrical empire included the original stage production this film was based on, captured the situation in one precise sentence for Life magazine. The film represents an investment of $22 million, and it's sitting in a can. The interest on $22 million is $1.25 million a year. That quote belongs in a business school case study on sunk costs, which is a brutal fate for a film that won 3 Oscars. The production itself was not without incident. Barbra Streisand and Walter Matthau developed a well-documented friction on set, and when Matthau brought his grievances to Zanuck, the studio head reportedly replied, "I'd like to help you out, but the film is not called Hello, Walter." That line is genuinely funny. The financial outcome, less so. Hello, Dolly, ranked in the top 5 highest-grossing films of the 1969 to 1970 season, which is the detail that keeps pulling me back to this story. The audience came. The budget made profitability unreachable from the moment principal photography began. Paramount spent somewhere between $20 million and $24 million on Paint Your Wagon in 1969, with sources disagreeing on the precise figure, and the studio built an entire gold rush frontier town from nothing in the remote wilderness of East Eagle Creek, Oregon, for a musical in which 2 of the 3 leads could not actually sing: Lee Marvin, Clint Eastwood, and Gene Seberg. None of them were vocalists by training or profession. Marvin approached Wandering Star with a delivery that suggested geology more than melody, and Eastwood proved more tuneful, but remained clearly a man better suited to a holster than a stage. You'd think somebody at Paramount would have flagged this before committing tens of millions of dollars to a musical. The paperwork suggests otherwise, and yet Paint Your Wagon ranked as Paramount's most popular release of 1969 and came in 5th among all studio releases that year, pulling an estimated $31 million in nominal worldwide gross. The film still failed to return a profit because the construction of that Oregon frontier town, combined with the logistical cost of keeping a large cast and crew in genuine wilderness for months, dismantled the budget from the inside. The production footnote worth holding on to is what Oregon looked like after the cameras stopped. An entire functioning ersatz gold rush settlement had been constructed in actual wilderness, and when filming wrapped, it simply ceased to exist as a working enterprise. That scale of practical construction was already becoming rare, and within a decade, it would be essentially gone. Darling Lili came close to ending Paramount entirely. Directed by Blake Edwards and starring Julie Andrews alongside Rock Hudson, the production climbed to a final cost of approximately $25 million in nominal terms, a figure that represented a genuine threat to the studio's financial stability. And domestic distributor rentals returned just $3.02 million against that spend. From an aviation and production technology standpoint, the film is extraordinary, and the disaster had very specific mechanical causes. Edwards wanted to shoot the World War I aerial sequences in South Carolina. Paramount overruled him and insisted on Weston Aerodrome in Leixlip, Ireland, where the second unit then sat waiting for clear weather for so long that the overruns on those sequences alone consumed millions of dollars. Ireland is genuinely beautiful. It is not reliably photogenic from the air. The aircraft fleet assembled for those sequences deserves attention on its own terms. Full-scale World War I replica fighters flew for the production, including Fokker DR-1 triplanes, Fokker D-7s, SE-5AS, Pfalz D-3S, and a Caudron 277. Slingsby Aircraft Limited constructed 6 additional 7/8 scale SE-5AS specifically for the film's requirements, and stunt pilots Charles Boddington and Derek Piggott handled the demanding sequences. A portion of this aircraft fleet had originally been built for the Blue Max in 1966 and was brought back into service for Darling Lili, which meant the airborne footage was visually spectacular even as the production accounting became increasingly distressing. Worth noting too, Darling Lili was co-written by William Peter Blatty, who would write The Exorcist 3 years later. He clearly had better material ahead of him. This wasn't it, at least not commercially. Myra Breckinridge operates as almost the inverse of everything else on this list. Where the musicals collapsed under the weight of excess spending and the roadshow theatrical release format that demanded premium ticket prices and advanced bookings the audience simply wouldn't provide, the 1970 Fox adaptation of Gore Vidal's satirical novel arrived with a relatively modest budget of $5.04 million and still managed to earn back only around $3 million domestically, which represents a failure of a different and more straightforward character. The cast brought together Raquel Welch, Mae West, and Rex Reed in a film that opened with an X rating before being reduced to R, and Gore Vidal, who had contributed to the adaptation of his own 1968 novel, publicly disowned the finished cut. Fox had positioned Myra Breckinridge to connect with younger audiences who had responded to Midnight Cowboy and Easy Rider, reading those films as evidence of a new appetite for unconventional material. The read was not entirely wrong. The execution was a different matter entirely. Myra Breckinridge now appears regularly on lists of the worst films ever produced, which places it in a separate category from the musicals on this list. Those films were technically competent and commercially unaffordable. This one was a creative collapse, which is at least a more honest kind of failure. Tora! 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 Demands a qualification because it's the most complicated entry here. The 1970 Fox recreation of the Pearl Harbor attack, with Richard Fleischer directing the American sequences and Toshio Masuda and Kinji Fukasaku handling the Japanese footage, carried a production cost of $25 million, and its domestic box office came in at $29.05 million, placing it ninth among the highest-grossing films of 1970. Fox's own records reportedly indicated the film needed $37.15 million in total rentals to break even, and it was tracking toward that threshold through combined markets, which complicates any straightforward classification as a loss. What isn't complicated is the scale of the practical filmmaking. The production secured the USS Yorktown, an Essex-class carrier commissioned in 1943, for the Japanese carrier takeoff sequences, with the Navy making her available because she was already approaching decommissioning in 1970. The Yorktown's angled deck and bridge island didn't precisely match any Japanese carrier of the period, but the visual impact was beyond dispute, and the film collected the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects as a direct result. The Yorktown now serves as a museum ship at Patriots Point in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, which means the actual vessel used in those sequences is still accessible. Akira Kurosawa had originally been engaged to direct the Japanese sequences and was replaced before photography concluded, a departure significant enough that it reshaped the entire tone of the film's second half. A 1994 survey at the USS Arizona Memorial found Tora, Tora, Tora was the single most common source of popular knowledge about the Pearl Harbor attack for American visitors, which is a legacy the box office figures don't capture at all. Everything else on this list starts to look modest once Waterloo enters the conversation. The 1970 Italian-Soviet co-production, directed by Sergei Bondarchuk and produced by Dino De Laurentiis, with Rod Steiger, Christopher Plummer, and Orson Welles in the principal roles, reportedly cost $25 million by Roger Ebert's 1971 account, with some sources citing considerably higher figures that trace back to single, unverified origins. Worldwide gross landed at an estimated $8 million, though precise documentation is difficult to confirm across multiple sources. The battle sequences drew on tens of thousands of Soviet soldiers serving as extras, dressed in period-accurate Napoleonic uniforms and supported by functioning cavalry and live artillery. This was practical filmmaking at a scale the industry has never attempted since, with no digital augmentation and no motion capture, just real soldiers, real horses, and real cannon smoke filling real landscape. The consequence that most people don't know about is what Waterloo's failure cost another director entirely. Stanley Kubrick had spent years in obsessive research on a Napoleon epic that MGM was developing, and when Waterloo collapsed commercially, The studio's reasoning was simple. Audiences had just rejected one expensive Napoleon film, and funding another was indefensible. Kubrick's Napoleon became one of the most celebrated unmade films in cinema history. That's the kind of collateral damage that changes what movies get made for a generation. The final entry here is also The Quietest. Cromwell, directed by Ken Hughes for Columbia Pictures in 1970, starred Richard Harris as Oliver Cromwell with Alec Guinness alongside him, carried a production cost estimated between $8 million and $10 million, and returned domestic figures modest enough that verified breakdowns are genuinely hard to locate. The film collected the Academy Award for Best Costume Design. Audiences, for the most part, declined to attend. Cromwell is the film on this list that nobody actively defends, and that absence of defenders tells its own story. The musicals attract champions. Tora, Tora, Tora carries documentary weight, and Waterloo remains visually astonishing even now. Cromwell is simply a competent, expensive, and commercially inert film about 17th century British politics that asked international audiences to invest emotionally in the English Civil War. They made a different choice. The pattern running through all 9 of these films is worth holding in mind. Several of them were not rejected by audiences in any meaningful sense. Paint Your Wagon ranked as Paramount's most popular release of its year. Hello, Dolly! Placed in the top 5 of its season. The studios didn't fundamentally misread what audiences wanted from a night at the cinema. They constructed budgets so large that genuine commercial success couldn't cover the debt, which is a structural failure rather than a creative one, and it took until the mid-1970s, specifically the shock of Jaws and then Star Wars, before the industry understood that lower cost and higher return was where survival actually lived. Those 2 films didn't just rescue their respective studios, they demonstrated that a box office hit didn't require a 9-figure production budget and a roadshow release strategy. The lesson had been available for a decade. It took 2 seismic successes to make it unavoidable. The studios that came through this era didn't get smarter in any organized way. They got lucky, or they got rescued by exactly the kind of lean genre filmmaking they'd spent years treating as beneath them. The pattern repeats across Hollywood's history in ways that keep turning up new examples. That's the territory this channel covers.